So cost reduction is something that all businesses do or should be doing. Unfortunately, many cost reduction efforts are inefficient and yield less than desired results. We've found that there are several best practices that team leaders and members can use to greatly improve any cost reduction effort. So in this tutorial, you're going to learn more than 24 cost reduction catalysts, categories, tips, questions, best practices to consider when you're trying to get costs out of your products, services, or manufacturing processes. You'll learn some facilitation best practices from personally running over 75 cost reduction workshops over the last 3 years. We'll talk a little bit about how to plan an event, some considerations that you should take into account before, during, and after the session. We'll show you some sample agendas, some keys to generate many ideas, some specific questions that you can ask participants to maximize the quality of the ideas and the quantity, and a lot more.
Maybe optimization, geometry changes. Maybe we just, designed it and we really need to do some finite element analysis on it to optimize the design that we've chosen. Testing. Second consideration for overserving is, are we offering too many alternatives? Have you ever made any last minute changes in order to meet some deadline? So this strategy deals with revisiting any band-aid fixes that you've done or last minute expensive changes in order to meet a deadline. Another big category that you can get a lot of benefit from is commonality or standardization. Whether they're fasteners, buttons, connectors, hinges, whatever it is that you have in your system, that maybe I can standardize on components and save a lot of money by purchasing it in economies of scale. Systems often interface with many other systems, and those other systems can influence the cost of our systems. So we should give early thought to other parts or systems that integrate with our part.
Three more things to consider in your cost reduction efforts, and one of them is supplier. How can the supplier help? Often when we do cost reduction sessions, we invite the suppliers in and they work with us on coming up with ideas.
So this is what I call my workshop builder, and just some of the things that we need to do when we're designing a workshop for a client. There's a lot of stuff. I'll open that up and show you a little bit in there, and then we get into the agenda. The actual agenda of the session. The welcome, the different idea generation. That's what's in green here. The different techniques we use for idea generation, and then eventually down selecting or prioritizing the ideas that we come up with, and then wrapping it up with the next steps. So before the session ever even starts, we talk a little bit about, is it the right project? What are the outcomes that we want to get out of the session? When are we going to do it? Where are we going to do it? What's the scope? What are we working on? What are we not? Even the day before session, what do we have? If there's any Excel files that you're going to use, and we often use some Excel files to capture some of the ideas. If there's any handouts, print those. Have the competitive parts available. And then I usually will set the stage before we jump into the activities. I'll talk about, I'll have everybody introduce themselves. We'll talk about the agenda. I'll tell them a little bit about how the sessions are going to run and how they're different from a typical brainstorming session. We have a way of capturing and organizing ideas, so I'll share with them that sheet. I'll go over the ground rules, just set the stage, prep a little bit. Sometimes I do a little brain primer, just to loosen them up. So a worksheet will look something like this. Okay, now you can see it. Basically, this is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We print these sheets out, we give them to teams of 2 or 3 with a clipboard, and they go around. So here's an example of the worksheet we use to capture ideas. We always customize and tailor this to particular project, but here's just one example. So it starts out with the first row is just the number, the idea number. Teams later on, all these things are sortable. Whoever generated the idea, we'd like to keep initials or names. And then this column here is the most important column. It's the idea. So here's where we actually summarize the ideas. Whereas the worst idea is something that's going to take more than 12 months to implement, and it's going to save less than 100,000 a year. So that's a 9, and this automatically calculates that. So when you're all done, you can sort by the 9 box.